Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my heartiest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today we are here for our special talk on Deepening Democracy in Cities. Can Research Play a Role? This lecture is part of the series, The State of Cities, City Conversations, and is being organized by Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI. I would now like to welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, who is Associate Professor at Visva-Bharati University, Santiniketan, and Visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritika. And I also welcome you all to this City Conversation series. And just before the talk begins, let me just give you a brief introduction about this City Conversation series, what this series is all about. And we all know that India is urbanizing rapidly, but at the same time are poorly managed. And this COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed the social and spatial disparities within the cities. And we need to really improve our urban governance. And this coincides with, as we know, the neoliberal public policy shifts, and there has been a paradigm shift in the urban policies in India. And for example, we have seen the withdrawal of state, the entry of private capital in the urban development. We have seen the rescaling of government from central to local levels through the process of decentralization. And this in fact, opens up the opportunities for partnership between government and private sector, government and citizens, and so on and so forth. And also, these sorts of governance arrangement have been marked by the involvement of the neighborhood association, the resident welfare association, the NGOs, and all in this name of depoliticization, the promotion of greater efficiency and all. And these changes are a complex form of governance with variety of stakeholders involved that influences the urban development policies. But if you consider the decentralization, decentralization has so far been a sort of paper tiger, and the current hierarchical administrative system of governmental decision making is inimical to devolution of power, as well as to implementing genuine reform at the local institutions. And these, at the end of the day, prevents the efficient and effective service delivery outcomes. So questions like which actors actually participate in such participatory arrangements, who are excluded, what are the typicality of those decision-making processes, what are the obstacles, and most importantly, do these arrangements improve urban services? And if so, then for whom? So all these have become crucially important. So in these City Conversation series, we are actually trying to engage with these sorts of issues. And today we are delighted to have with us Professor Ankur Sarin, who is an Associate Professor, Public System Group, and Ravi J. Mathai Center for Innovation in Education at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And his first work include the investigation of the effects of social and economic inequality on welfare outcomes of the children, and understanding the influence of technology on the social and economic life of the marginalized. And specifically, he has been working on the RTE, an instrument that promotes a more inclusive education system as part of the Institute's Right to Education Resource Center. And prior to joining the IMMA, he was a researcher at Mathematica Policy Research at Princeton. And today, his title of talk is Deepening Democracy in Cities, Can Research Play a Role? And also we have as panelists, Professor Tathagata Chatterji, who is Professor of Urban Planning and Governance at Xavier University, Bhubaneswar. We have with us also Mr. Tikender Panwar, who is the former Deputy Mayor, Shimla, and Senior Visiting Fellow of IMPRI, New Delhi. And we expect Mr. Unhale, the Joint Commissioner, Department of Municipal Corporation, Government of Maharashtra, to join shortly with us. And also we have with us Dr. Simi Mehta, who is the CEO of IMPRI. So with this short, brief introduction, let me just hand over this virtual floor to Professor Sarin for your lecture. It's over to you, Professor Sarin.
Thank you, Dr. Chattopadhyay. Thank you to IMPRI for hosting this event. I think the series of conversations that have already happened as part of this, I'm quite a sort of, in some ways, privileged and honored to be seeing the other speakers that have been there preceded me. So very happy to be here. I am not a city person. And if you would have noticed in the introduction, there was nothing really to point me to being a specialized city person. But over the last couple of years, several of pieces of my work or efforts have taken me to cities. And really, I'm going to try to speak from that experience. But nothing in my academic training has trained me to work on cities. And in fact, I would try to leave as much space as I can to hear more from the discussants. People on the panel are people whose work I have learned from. So, and I typically end up, I am very curious to listen to them. So I'm going to hope to leave some space, but I hope to also just provoke some questions. That's really what I am hoping to do today. So I have a brief presentation. I'll just share that with you. So that's really the question that I am trying to have this discussion around. Deepening democracies in cities, can research play a role? And I think we almost assume always that it can play a role, but I think we need to critically interrogate that assumption. And let me be very clear, I'm interrogating it from my own personal location, my own personal reflections. I definitely cannot be speaking on behalf of all researchers, and my experience does not, I'm sure, generalize to institutions and other kind of environments at all. But so please take it, please take whatever I say with that caveat in mind. I just do want to, given the current situation, which is hard to, in some sense, keep out of the mind, I just want to share with you one particular initiative that we are taking at this point. And in case you have any suggestions or ideas on this initiative, I would welcome them. We are trying to create these basic kits. The central element of that kit is an oximeter, a pulse oximeter, which we all know is essential for managing the crisis that we face today. And the idea is that if we can get it to every single ASHA, it might help the public health system cope and react to it better. There is evidence that this would be a critical instrument at this point in the pandemic, but there is also evidence that it would play a crucial role even beyond that, especially in managing child and infant pneumonia. So that's what we are working on at this point. We're trying to crowdfund this campaign. And in case any of you have any suggestions or any ideas or any thoughts on this, we would love to hear them. Now, coming back to our discussion, just a few points about Indian democracy, and of course, entire books and chapters, etc., can be written on it. But a few points that I just want to, in some ways, highlight. One, of course, is that it is quite remarkable for, despite the fact that we call ourselves a democracy, there are really no significant decision makers who are directly elected to their roles. So anybody who you can think of as sort of being a very significant decision maker, including the Prime Minister, is somebody who's indirectly elected. Now, I'm not saying anything new, but it is worth reflecting on that that's the nature of our democracy. And power is centralized in multiple ways. We know that. And there are instruments that centralize that power. The anti-defection law centralizes that in the legislature. Of course, there's power centralization in terms of how governance is organized, but I'm also talking about how power is centralized within political parties, right? And I would believe even these electoral bonds, and there's been plenty in terms of sort of critique of them as an instrument, but I believe that they also centralize power further in political parties. Right? Now, there have been conversations and arguments or suggestions that perhaps we should just acknowledge the fact that we de facto behave like a presidential system and might as well go towards direct elections as far as and have a presidential system. But that, in my mind, only further promotes centralization, does not promote decentralization, especially if nothing else changes. Right? Elected mayors is another directly elected mayors. Let me be clear about that. Is another suggestion which some states practice, some cities, I believe, also practice. But by and large, it's a promise in the future. It's not something that we have in the immediate, for most cities right now. What we do have as directly elected folk who are in roles and where they are involved in some kind of decision making are councillors or corporators. And of course, they have very limited powers, limited resources and capacity, but just in terms of sort of saying, hey, does the formal role include making decisions which affect the daily lives of people? We do have elected councillors and corporators. Now, in this context, let me bring in the other piece that I want to engage with is the nature of research, right? And now let me also be clear, as I said, I'm speaking from my position as an academician in an academic institute. This doesn't mean this is all research. This doesn't mean that even all academic research is of a particular kind, but these are again my thoughts and reflections on it, right? So I would broadly put them into these two categories. One is the more recognized, rewarded, sort of mainstream traditional research, which emphasizes knowledge production, which in some ways is universally applicable, right? We are trying to have conversations with people around the world, and we're trying to in some ways engage with theories. We're trying to engage with phenomena that everybody can identify with. We can sort of join into that conversation. Right? Very often, the central emphasis of our research, the mainstream research, or sort of what we come to be rewarded and recognized for, is trying to speak implicitly to centralized actors, right? Even when we are, I would argue, even when we are talking about decentralization, we are somehow trying to speak towards a centralized actor, saying, look, can you behave differently? And in some part, that's also driven by this idea, look, if we can speak to a centralized actor, the centralized actor has more power. That's the reality right now. And we can suggest, and this goes with sort of often, researchers have this tendency for expertise, right? We are taught to be specialists in one thing. And so we are trying to motivate somebody to say, hey, can you move this one lever? And can you then bring about change, right? But when you're talking, so that's again, what's the nature of what I'm calling recognized research. Third, generally research is then supposed to be structured. There's a linear process, we identify sort of a need, rationale. Often that need and rationale is not located in the reality or of the ground situation. It is often speaking to a gap in the literature, right? And the literature, as I've already pointed out to, a lot of it is sort of speaking on general principles and more theoretical, right? But in any case, the idea is that can we fill that gap, right? And then, or if you're doing something on the ground, we sort of have a plan and we go implement it. Then we come back and say, how did it work? Did it not work? And say, okay, this works and this doesn't work, right? So if you look at, for instance, the randomized control trials and the field experiments of that kind, that's exactly what they're trying to do. Now, there is this other kind of research, which I would have put into this bucket of sort of saying, what most people will ask, why are you doing it? Right? You're sitting in an academic research institution, you're a researcher, why are you doing it? And what is this kind of research? One that might be very local and contextually specific, right? Which is perhaps trying to create knowledge which may not necessarily translate to information or useful information beyond that particular context. Right? It is trying to speak to decentralized power actors who may have, in most cases, far less power than say, hey, can you not talk? What about, talking to somebody at the state level? Or what about talking to somebody at the national level, right? But here you're talking about saying, oh, can I get to, 198 councillors of AMC? Can I get them to behave differently? So you're talking about moving many more levers. Right? And this kind of research typically, is more cyclical, is more iterative. You need to sort of feel your way through it. So there are these in my understanding, I've come to believe that there are these sort of, very distinct ways of doing research. And we are, as researchers, often struggling to figure out, well, which one, do we do? Which one should we be doing? Especially that the research culture typically promotes the one that I've put into this umbrella called recognized. The second point that I want to, in some sense, raise is, I think as researchers, we need to critically ask ourselves do we really believe in democracy? And I mean, maybe that's sort of too provocative a question, but I would, at least like to point out some of the tensions between how we as researchers are maybe trained to think and believe and practice, etc., etc. Research talks about specialized expertise, and it also, talks about the, typically as experts, we are supposed to have the answers. This is right and this is not right. This is how we should be doing things. Right? On the other hand, democracy is talking about saying, look, we need to have more faith in collective wisdom. Right? Collective wisdom may not lead us to a place where we necessarily believe what we necessarily believe is right, but there is value in collective wisdom, and that is the whole underlying, in some sense, the underlying idea of democracy. Right? As researchers, are we willing to sort of put a trust and faith into that? Right? Are we willing to sort of say, yeah, maybe I do have expertise of a particular kind, but that's just one kind of knowledge, that's one kind of useful information, one kind of expertise. But there are multiple perspectives, multiple views, multiple kinds of expertise that are out there, multiple knowledge systems as well. Can we, and when we're talking about democracy, and especially if you're going to say, well, research that could generate deepening of democracy, we're talking about strengthening people's abilities to make informed choices, not necessarily of other researchers or say even a centralized actor or somebody in power to make these choices. And I wonder how many times when we are doing our research, we actually have that in our minds. Now, let me jump in some ways from this theoretical questions or provocations to just saying, okay, well, what's the reality as far as local elected representatives, and taking the example which is, I guess speaks to where we are right now in times of an emergency. So there is an absence of a well-defined and specific role in the emergency framework operational in India for local elected representatives. I don't think anybody is surprised by that. That you don't see local elected representatives. Again, there are some exceptions in some states and in some cities, but by and large, you don't see a well-designated role for local elected representatives, despite them being a part of our institutional apparatus, right? But despite the absence of this formal role from our studies and from our conversations, from the efforts that we've been trying to put in, we find them actually responding in several informal ways. So they don't wait for somebody to come and say, hey, this is your formal role, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that weakens their ability to respond, but we find that they do respond. And they, in fact, are the first port of call when people do need help, right? And when I'm saying people do need help, people who, perhaps constitute the bulk of this country. So when you look at the regulatory framework, as we are basically, right now, the response is governed by two central acts, the Epidemic Diseases Act and the Disaster Management Act. Now most municipal statutes, right, which every state in some sense has, they actually do prescribe a role for the local governments in dealing with epidemics, but you don't see that invoked at all. Again, there may be exceptions in some states, but by and large, you see these two central acts being invoked and not the municipal statutes, which also prescribe a role for local governments, right? I mean, in a sense, I'm just reinforcing or repeating what we know from many other domains, that the kind of decentralization and devolution that we hope and that we aspire to does not really happen in practice. This was an article that I wrote last year during the first wave, along with another counselor, where we listed out several ways that local representatives could respond and how they could use their local knowledge to be able to understand who are the communities in need, what need, how do we tap into local distribution networks, whether it be the newspaper person who knows, or the postman, or the person who delivers the milk. And use the local grounded knowledge of the councillor in order to respond to the need, especially during the time of the lockdown. And most of these ideas were from this councillor. The point what I want to raise is that, look, these are people who have this knowledge. Now, an immediate question comes up when we talk about including local representatives is, can we trust local elected representatives, right? So the first question is, well, who are we? And what is our legitimacy vis-a-vis these elected representatives who've come in elected by a reasonably large constituencies, some of which could be, you know, if you look at the scale of things, it could be in the context of other countries, could be representing entire sort of be a member of a parliament, right? So I think we always need to be conscious about this. Well, who are we to sort of say, can we trust local representatives? Second question is, why not, right? What makes us believe that we cannot trust them? And if there is in fact a problem of capacity, as you know, one always points to, it is a problem of institutions. It is not a problem of people, right? It is because we perhaps have not, it's the institutional environment that doesn't lead to capacity development, the institutional environment that does not create the space. It cannot be the case, and it is not the case, that these people in some ways are people that, you know, we cannot trust. If we can trust other people, whether they are administrators, etc., because maybe there is a particular selection process that has, you know, operated when these administrators have been put into their roles, then we should be asking, why is it that our institutional environment, our selection process, etc., does not lead to similar kind of capacity and similar kind of trust in these representatives, especially when they are part of the governance structure. So now coming to the, you know, perhaps the central point in the conversation, right? How do we create change, right? How do we deepen democracy? So one is that we generate knowledge that persuades those in power to give it up in favor of decentralized actors. In some ways, we often, when we do research, when we speak from our research, we are in some ways pleading with this case that those in power, because, you know, should give up this power and let those who, and devolve it. You know, I think, I don't think that, you know, one will be able to create change without this aspect of it as well. But it is sort of heroic to believe that only this would create change. The option 2 is that you actually, you know, you generate knowledge, you empower and increase the formal capacity of directly elected representatives. So you actually engage in research, you actually engage in processes that perhaps enable strengthen these representatives, these folk, to actually, you know, negotiate the institutional environment, which right now typically does not give them formal power and roles and responsibilities. So this is, I'm just going to quickly now recount some of the things that we've done. I've been very lucky to have the support of these 2 institutions, Ahmedabad, where I am a faculty member, and UNICEF, which has sort of allowed us to do this work on strengthening local elected representatives. Right? So there's a lot of literature saying, look, why perhaps local elected representatives, you know, need to be looked at. What we find by and large is that whilst they, you know, they work in many informal ways and sort of, you know, with their informal networks, and, you know, you can go back to the work of Professor Benjamin Solly, etc., and you'll, you know, one sees all of that. What we found from our own research, etc., is that they often lack formal capacity, information about, you know, how do formal institutions work formally? What is their, you know, what roles do the institutions provide for them? How do you work institutional power, right? And really, that's what we've been trying to develop. So I'm very clear that I'm not saying that they don't have capacity to work, but where they perhaps lack is this sort of capacity to deal with formal institutions. Now, many of them obviously develop this over time, and, you know, but that remains restricted, limited to only a few, and that information is passed on primarily along party lines. it's not that there is very little in terms of sort of formal training, etc., which leads to this capacity development. I mean, as an institute, I wonder how many quote unquote training activities have we done for elected representatives. I mean, maybe there might have been some exceptions, but by and large, that's not somebody who we engage with, right? Even though we profess we are engaging with public policy, we're dealing with governance. And again, I repeat, I'm speaking from my own personal position. So we've tried to develop this handbook for the councillors, you know, containing information about how the municipal corporation works, you know, what are their, you know, what is the system like? How can they navigate the system? You know, how can you, when you're taking part in the General Assembly, you know, how can you raise an issue? How can, you know, what are points of order? And many of this, at least in the context where we were working, this was not really known to most councillors. And it took a lot of effort to actually try to collate all of this information from different sources. I had a very, I mean, I have a very strong team which actually puts this together, works hard and perseveres with it. So, but this is sort of what we've been trying to do. And, you know, we've been looking at things in terms of personal budgets. Where is the money being spent? We were surprised that when we analyzed the personal budget of, you know, where the expenditure was being made for a councillor and took it back to the councillor himself was sort of surprised, or I didn't know that I was spending most of my money, say, you know, in a particular domain, right? And this is not information that sort of feeds back to them as well. We're trying to figure out how do we, you know, get this information to them. We've mapped out what are the particular social protection schemes that are available in Ahmedabad in particular, in the city in particular. So if they do want to work on it, what are the programs, etc., that they can access? We've, you know, mapped this out. We also tried to say, well, since the councillor is going to be working at the ward level, can we generate information at the ward level so that the councillor knows his or her ward? So I mean, I'll just show you, you know, we created ward profiles talking about, well, what does each ward look like in terms of basic socioeconomic characteristics, whether or not the ward committee meetings are happening, not happening. They're required to happen at least once every month. You know, this says that no, they don't happen once every month. Anganwadi centers, are they functioning? How many of them are present in their wards, so that, you know, they can then potentially act on them. And then we've created the city-wide maps, which provide information at the zonal level in terms of where public healthcare facilities are located. Now, you know, so this is just one piece. And honestly, I don't, you know, the utilization of these pieces of information are not going to be immediate. I realize that. But we are again hoping to, you know, bring this to the fore and bring this to the attention of folk. Right? So yes, we've also tried to create platforms where we can invite cooperators and councillors, and, you know, Tikender ji has been a part of these conversations as well, direct conversations with people who are elected representatives, and, you know, hear them, get us to hear their voices in some ways. These are 3 sort of webinars that we've done. One particularly only hearing from women councillors. And more recently, we've organized another interaction between Professor John Rez and councillors to engage on this idea of an urban employment program. So just to conclude my part of it, I mean, yes, I think there is a renewed, I mean, there is a need to pay attention to this aspect in terms of our local representatives. There is potential even in terms of sort of saying, besides the objective of deepening democracy, I think there is potential in terms of improving outcomes as well. And finally, to just go back to what Dr. Chattopadhyay also referred to, you know, we need to, when we're talking about research, etc., we need to ask questions about our institutions also, right? And, you know, Do we need to, in some ways, always reinforce status quo, always reinforce the way power is distributed, or sometimes do we also need to question how power is distributed and what, in some sense, market ideologies take us to? So I'll just pause here, and I would love to sort of hear your thoughts and discussions on this.
Thank you, Dr. Sarin, for your interesting talk, and really you stressed about the importance of the local and context-specific research, which we need to know, because as we know, the Indian cities are very much complex entities and they differ a lot. In fact, even within a particular word of a city, there are a lot of differences. So unless and until we know our word very carefully or very distinctly, it's not possible, not even for the local councillors to solve their problem. Just if we consider the differences or different types of problems that each of the words they are facing. And also you mentioned about the lack of executive, although the councillors, they have some executive decision making power, but they are left with limited powers and resources. And also you mentioned about the absence of any well designated role of the local representative, especially in this context of pandemic. And though I want to mention here that even if we look at the 12th schedule of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, then there are certain provisions related to the role of the urban local governments in health and water or sanitation related aspects. But unfortunately, for many reasons, they are not properly devolved, or there are a lot of institutional overlappings and all these things. So which actually makes even the provision of urban basic services like water supply a bit problematic. So, and apart from that, you also mentioned about the importance of greater devolution of power, also the need for empowering the capacity of the local representatives, and also you mentioned about the improving the capacity of the local representatives to lead the formal institutions, because as you mentioned rightly that especially in the Indian context, many of the urban local representatives, they respond to the COVID crisis mainly in the informal way. You mentioned about the work of Sorry Benjamin, who especially espoused this concept of occupancy urbanism, where mainly the channel of interaction with the citizens, with the municipal officials or the municipal councillors, elected representatives, they are majorly informal in nature. Okay, which actually provide some sort of distinctive feature to the entire cities, the entire political economy of the cities and their capacity to deliver urban services. So I'm sure that our discussions or the panelists, they will shed some more light on your thoughts, and then we will take forward our discussion. So let me first request Professor Tathagata Chatterji, if you please comment on what Dr. Sarin has said. It's over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Soumyadip. It's really a pleasure meeting again. Dr. Sarin, it was really a very interesting and thought-provoking talk. The power relations in India, particularly in this arena of urban governance, are very much tilted towards the executive arm and not so much towards the elected arm of the government. But of course, I mean, there are the situation, it's not exactly uniform. I mean, it varies from state to state. Kerala, I mean, obviously is one example where the local representatives has got lot of more power in the executive sense, and there in Kerala's urban governance system, the mayor has the executive power and there is no municipal commissioner. In fact, the municipal commissioner is actually called the secretary to the municipal government. And also in some sense, there had been an attempt in West Bengal also to empower the urban local governments. especially during the time of the left front regime. But it had not followed exactly the way the system has unfolded in Kerala, and there had been some problems. But recently, in this COVID time, I found that in Calcutta, I'm not talking about other cities in Calcutta. I mean, I had some personal interaction, and I found that there the elections had not happened. Because of the COVID, the election to the municipal government was postponed, and the local municipalities, the ward councillors were redesignated as the local COVID coordinator. And they have been quite effective. In some wards in South Calcutta that I had some personal interaction, I found that they had been really very effective, and they have the local knowledge. But I think a bigger issue here when we talk about this as a research paradigm, I think we need to look at this issue of deepening of democracy in urban governance in theoretical terms as well. To see from a broader theoretical lens, is that there are certain fundamental questions which we need to address and link back to what Dr. Sarin was mentioning. Is that Tocqueville has argued that democracy functions well when people use their associational capacities and recognize each other as rights-bearing citizens. But unlike in the Western world where democracy has come after the industrial capitalism had stabilized, and there had been a lot of movements for the working classes in India, but not very evenly in India. The democracy has come at a time, at the backdrop of colonialism, high degree of feudalism, and where the society at large, there are very high degrees of there are entrenched social inequalities. So the relationship between the state and the people are often seen in this situation through a lens of clientelism and patronage networks. Now, these the 74th Amendment, which Soumyadip, you had very rightly mentioned, had tried to deepen the democracy in the city systems. But there had been, the act has been unevenly applied. And there are, as I think it was Patrick Heller. Patrick Heller said that when we talk about deepening of democracy, we need to think about three aspects. One is that there has to be a participation, representation, and democratic stateness. Participation here comes in the form of elections, and representation is where actual power is transferred to the representatives and the people, where they can make a day-to-day impact on the way the city is governed, rather than being a very passive receivers of the governance. And third point is about the stateness or the roles of the institutions, which Dr. Sarin has also been mentioning. The institutions has got hugely important roles. Now, if the institutions themselves don't imbibe the values of participatory democracy, then even if you have the outer form of electoral democracy, it becomes all the more challenging to deepen it to a everyday governance context. And this kind of, brings us to the present situation where, irrespective of, different political parties, what we are seeing is a rise of populist authoritarianism. Now the question is, how do you link up the question of populist authoritarianism and the deepening of democracy in a research terms? Because the populist authoritarian leaders, they also they are the people's representative, and what Andreas Faludi was saying the other day is that the populist leaders are often I the people, the leader themselves, they are the embodiment of people, but what is their relationship to the question of participation? Do they favor participation, or they favor people as a part of the patronage clientelistic network? I think, that is some of the deeper questions we need to bring up when we think that, what sort of knowledge we are producing at the city level, and how knowledge can address some of these critical questions. I think I will stop at this moment.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chatterji, for your remarks. And you rightly pointed about these virtual there is a it just doesn't mix this populist authoritarianism and the democracy, because if I believe in this authoritarianism, then definitely I'll be interested in subverting the democratic principles and ethos and all these things. So those two are they do not just simply mix. So I think Professor Ankur, if we can take the views of all the panelists, and then if you can respond to them, I think that will be easier for you. So would you prefer that?
Yes, that would be good.
Okay. So thank you. So then now I request Mr. Tikender Panwar, if you please share your comments or views on it.
Thank you, Professor Arun. It was lovely to hear you. Can you hear my voice? Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. So I don't think I have much to add except what Professor Tathagata said, and he eloquently placed actually what needs to be done. But when Professor Sarin was presenting, I think more he stressed on devolution. Decentralization and devolution. I found the element of democratization probably maybe I didn't hear that properly, missing in that. I think what is also required apart from decentralization and devolution is the democratization. And when I say democratization, it doesn't mean democratization of just the elected institution. Of course, that is very important. But the democratization, as a research group, how is that manifesting now? And I have some anecdotes and some probably experiences that I would like to share here. And as actually Professor Tathagata reminded me, probably it struck me only when he raised this issue. What are the hurdles to that, to the entire process of democratization? So what we are witnessing in the 74th Constitutional Amendment is more of decentralization. But does that also translate into democratization of our people, of our societies in the urban realm? How are we looking at it? I think that's the first thing that I would like to flag. The second issue, which I think needs to be followed, is that apart from this very interesting connections that were brought up, especially the kind of societies we are living in. After all, why should we require decentralization? I mean, just let's understand that. Why is it important to decentralize? I think it's part of the feature of our civil society. I mean, that's why the relationship between the state and people has to be more of a citizenry form. But what we are witnessing in two aspects, and I don't know how you understand that. The first aspect is that we find over centralization of what I call a nexus exists in the cities between the transnational corporations and the city planning process. So what we are witnessing is that the entire planning process in the cities is hardly democratic, is hardly even decentralized. Forget about democratic; it's not even decentralized. So the entire planning process is in a very centralized form, where they know jolly well what needs to be done, by the way, in the cities and who is to be served, for example, the large capital. And that's why I said it's a nexus, the nexus that exists between the transnational corporations, because they will come, they will say, hey, you don't know how to run a city. So let us plan and we will plan for you. And most of the cities, I mean, majority of the cities, I would say, are actually planned not by the city representatives or the city councils, even if they have a capacity. I don't understand Mumbai. Why shouldn't Mumbai have not possess a capacity? Why shouldn't Delhi not possess a capacity? By parastatals, so like we have the Delhi Development Authorities, we have the Mumbai Development Authorities. So that's one aspect when we talk about the cities, where this whole process, and to me, it's more linked to neoliberal capitalism that we are witnessing. More accumulation of capital, and I do not know because, and that's Professor Sarin for you to find out and tell us. But reading Samuel Stein, he points out that in most of the US cities, the primary mode of accumulation of capital in US happens to be through real estate development. I don't know what is the primary mode of accumulation of capital in cities, or we always felt it's manufacturing and then of course finance, but real estate, I mean, how are we looking at it? So this is a larger, and that's why we have lots of literature, right, from Ursula Hughes to all those international giants writing time and again that there's a systematic shift that has taken place in cities, and the systematic shift that what we used to call use value for the society. Take for example, education, health, city planning. Of course, that's why I brought that earlier. Has actually metamorphosized into exchange value. It's been commoditized, like you also pointed out, education for that matter. And this phenomenal kind of wealth that gets generated and gets accumulated. I mean, it's bizarre. And the kind of Baijus, Vedantus, and all that is happening. I mean, you find Navaratras all of a sudden were taken over by Vedantus. Can you believe that? I mean, Navaratras, it was Amazon that was filling all the newspaper leading it was, but all of a sudden the day NET result came out and you saw completely gone, Amazon was out, and people. So that's one process that is happening in the cities, and I say there's a linkage between that and the way we are planning our cities. So basically to facilitate that process, the process of accumulation of capital, and in that process. The second aspect, what Professor Tathagata was pointing out is, the people, over centralization of instead of democratizing the process. So you say, no, we have city governments, but you don't allow the city governments to be a hindrance to this process of accumulation of capital. Now let me just cite anecdotes to that. When we were in Shimla, I mean, when I was serving Shimla town, one of the forms in which this massive accumulation is going to happen now is through the Internet of Things. The whole bogey of smart cities that we are witnessing. So when one of the giants, and I can name it's Reliance, that came to Shimla and said, we want to dig the town. Okay, so we said we won't allow you to dig the town, and because the basic infrastructure to lay your layers of smart cities and to lay layers of Internet of Things happens to be that basic single infrastructure. So we said, no, we won't allow that to happen. Now, this doesn't happen. This can't happen in all the cities. So, just try to understand that process and the process that I'm trying to build. Maybe I'm, I don't know, if I lack, then just I'll just try to reiterate what I'm trying to build up. So we said, we won't allow. They said, what do you want? I mean, we are paying you. I mean, whatever is the cost right of way, we are paying you. You allow us to dig? We said, no, we won't allow. So then we also consulted some of our, pro-democratic people who said, they said, ask them to lay 2 ducts to the city free of cost. Now, what does that mean? Now, it means if they are laying 2 ducts, because they require only 1, they were laying 3 ducts. So 2 ducts for the city government. 6 months, there was a deadlock. We didn't allow them to dig. Finally, they had to budge. Now, the 2 ducts lying completely empty in the town of Shimla. What does that mean? So that means that if that Internet of Things has to happen, so in that process, when I say democratization of the surplus, that has to happen. So at least you can pass on that to your citizens, where this one-sided play that was happening, you could actually restrict. Now, this you cannot imagine to happen at a larger matter narrative level that I'm trying to build, or to check, that accumulation of the large capital that is taking place. Now, other cities, you'll feel fine. Oh, please come, please lay your duct. At least you provide services to our people, not realizing that it's not just services; it's actually massive accumulation of capital, and the state has actually kind of withdrawn from this important sector. That is, so just to cite one example, and then, as I pointed out, Ursula, there are many such instances, many such issues. You'll have city development plans. You'll have solid waste management plans. You'll have the mobility plans, which all speaks for large capital-intensive technologies. So, when we speak about knowledge and when we speak about where is that alternative going to come from, how is that alternative? So that's one part. And the second part, when I say the dispensation or the state is like not even bothered. They say, okay, fine. We have the elected institution, and the elected institution justifies everything. And what is the state of the elected institution? Sorry, I have actually been in that institution, and I'm telling you, and that's what Professor Tathagata, that's how it struck my mind. It's not democratization. Not to say that it's not important, because democratization would also mean a check on this accumulation, one, and would also mean, rendering better services to its people. Now, who is a kind of a hindrance to more democratization? To me, I mean, in simple terms, I mean, what would be the manifestation of more democratization, or say more participation of people? To me, it would be in the form of ward services, in the form of ward committees, where people decide, they plan what should happen, how the ward should be shaped. I do not know how many places in the country, barring of course Kerala and a few other states, where these ward sabhas takes place. Nowhere. No, that comes from an anecdotal experience. So we tried, because we come from a different domain and from a different political thought. We said, no, we have to break this jinx. And we told our councillors that, look, we will not sanction anything unless you actually approve it from the ward sabha. And it's constitutionally mandatorily written. You ought to have a ward sabha. Why is it not happening? They said, no, because we will decide. I mean, I the people, I will decide for my ward. Who else can? So, the budget has to be passed to me. I will finalize it. So we didn't budge. They finally had to agree. So ward sabhas actually took place. But every 3 months, the ward sabha should have met. The next 3 months, yes, fine. We could see, I mean, completely different paradigm of participation, different priorities, which we never realized could have been a priority in a ward, when we see from a city perspective. So, but the 4th month, we could see there were no ward sabhas, but still we had all the signatures. So the same signatures which were there in the ward sabha earlier were again forged and brought back to the city council, saying, look, this is the ward sabha that has happened, and it is approved, a number of things. So to me, I think the big hurdle to further empowering the people, or further democratizing this process of democratic governance happens to be also the elected representatives. Now, that doesn't mean that you get rid of the system. I mean, what we are witnessing now, and I'll come to that also probably. And with that, I won't take much of the time. How do we break that? We can only break it by more participatory mode. So there was one very novel idea that we built. I don't know whether we will be able to institutionalize it later, but definitely that a discussion has to be raised. And that was that if you hold a ward sabha, if you further decentralize the process of collection in the municipal council, instead of the entire money coming to the council in the form of taxes, in the form of n number of things, even if we share 10% of that money to the ward, say for example, in large wards which actually contribute maybe 1 crore or 5 crores to the council. So imagine what does that mean to a ward sabha. So, and that would be not empowering the councillor or the corporator, but that would be, creating another institution where maybe I think we require some of those experiments to happen. So that's one part. So therefore, so more democratization that I'm talking about. So that's one part. But what we are witnessing from the state perspective is that instead of further cementing those ties and further laying a path towards this process, is completely scuttle it. And that's what we are witnessing in the form of smart cities, in the form of the SPVs that have come up, the special purpose vehicles who are not even answerable to the elected councils. And that's why I said there's a big nexus. And this nexus, last thing that I would like to end, and again, it comes from that anecdotal experience in Shimla, when we were building this Shimla water utility, which was kind of a model for the entire country, the entire thing integrated right from production of water to distribution and also to managing this sewage, a complete integration, right from every drop of water that's lifted, every drop of sewer that's thrown back into a greater water Shimla supply circle, which was part of the municipality. Fair amount of autonomy, integrated institution, answerability, owners. And the beauty is that where you had hepatitis, people were dying, but a single case of hepatitis was reported in the last 5 years. But the moment we were out, I mean, in 2017, and the multilateral institutions which were funding it, they were smart enough to bring in what they wanted to. Now that has actually metamorphosized into a company called the Shimla Jal Nigam. No answerability to the council. The tariffs are decided by them. So, these processes to me are very dangerous. And so what kind of parallel institutions can we build where we are able to build those knowledge networks, where we are able to at least provide some of the basics to the city governments and also to larger section of the people. Else, actually, it is turning into less of a citizen-state interface, more of a ruler-ruled interface. And so that's we are witnessing from a feudal perspective, but also from a new liberal capital. And interestingly, there's a gelling between both the feudal perspective and the new liberal capital, which I don't think can go hand in hand. But that's what we are witnessing in the city. So I think with that,
So thank you, Mr. Panwar, for again raising some very interesting points. And I just very much interested in this ward committee, financial empowerment of the ward committee. But just let me share some personal anecdotes, because I actually investigated or examined the functioning of the ward committees in the West Bengal. And West Bengal is among the few states in India which actually constitutionally mandated the formation of ward committee for each and every ward. So up to 2011, those ward committee, ward sabhas and these monthly meetings and the annual general meetings, they used to held in a regular fashion. But if we look at the actual functioning of those ward committee, then I found that many of those ward committee, right from the beginning of the selection of the ward committee members to the entire functioning of the ward committee meetings and all these things, the decision-making process were purely politicized. Okay, so again, there is a different literature for that.
Dr. Soumyadip, let me just point out, even in Shimla, It was completely politicized. I mean, because majority of the council members were BJP. So we had a large number of BJP, but still, at least you had a larger section of participation of people. And in the Ward Sabha, you could find a large number of people attending that. So that's my point. I don't mind politicizing the ward committees, but
even after politicization is happening, but since as we know that in the Indian context, it's basically the a majority of the people who are living at in the cities, they depend on the local councillors. So this patronage relationship or the clientelistic relationship is very much important for them in accessing the urban resources, which is otherwise unavailable to them.
True.
So that's right. So that's a very important issue, and there are a lot of you may be familiar with the concept of this party society by Visva-Bharati, who is now teaching at. So he has worked a lot on these aspects of this entire. He actually contained this very idea of party society by Chatterji and all, the political society by Chatterji and all these things. He actually termed that party society in the context of West Bengal. So that's a different discussion altogether. But again, another point which I want to mention here, taking a cue from your discussion, like when we are talking about the devolution, then I think we need to really think about what are the functions which need to be devolved. For example, there should be some, the capacities of the tier 2 cities in the municipal corporation, they are not same. So whenever we are actually specifying the 18 functions which are there in the 12th schedule, so it's not, we should not expect that those functions to be performed by some smaller cities. So that may be performed by some bigger cities like Delhi, Mumbai, or Ahmedabad, but it's not possible for the smaller cities. For example, I belong to a small city like Bolpur. So it's not possible for the Bolpur municipality to perform all those functions which are listed in the 12th schedule. So that's another important issue which we need to seriously think of. Another important thing is, even if we go by the traditional public finance literature, then all the functions which are listed in this 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, they are not decentralizable. For example, if you consider the case of, say, simple this drainage. Now, drainage, if you go by the typical theory of public finance and all these things, then they are more suitable for decentralization, that we know. Okay, but given the incidence of this clientelism or patronage system, there is a higher chance of under provision of drainage services if we totally decentralize these services. So it's a very complex issue. So we need to think of many factors, and that's why it is very much at the same time it is important to do knowledge building depending on the local contextual specificities.
I don't want to build a binary. I don't want to build a binary. Just 1 second, Professor Chatterji.
Yes,
I don't want to build a binary between this or that. My point is that, now let me be very specific. For example, why I still advocate for a strong democratic decentralized form. And Romy Khosla has been advocating, why can't we have a national service where you employ, the passers from SPAs before joining their masters to at least go to these small towns and build their capacities, write their plans, instead of, the GIZs coming up or the large transnational corporations coming up. Because, so not to go into that binary, this or that, but the point is, these large giants, when they enter your town, if you see their plans, it's a holocaust, I'm telling you. And then they would say, we will attract investment. You just forget about the investment. We'll attract those players, and they completely mess up. And so that's just that.
So let me now move over to Mr. Unhale has already joined with us. So he is with us. So it's over to you, Mr. Unhale, for your comments.
Very good evening.
Good evening.
As always, this has been also a very interesting discussion. I think I couldn't participate in the initial part of this webinar, but having played a role of heading a municipal body, also heading a smart city, and now in a role of containing and controlling them, it does gives me a very mixed, bag of thoughts and emotions on this particular topic. I always felt that democracy is not about the procedure or the means, but the end. So is democracy only about elections? Is it just voting once in 5 years and then the voter gets relegated into a complainant and has to run around the behind officers or councillors to get his job done? I somehow feel that the municipal framework of decentralization of democracy in Indian context has been different in India as compared to other countries in maybe global south, or even for that matter, Europe and US, of course, is a different issue. So Indian scene was always peculiar. We always started a national struggle with, the local self-government. That was what the imperial powers gave us. That, okay, you at least learn to run a city better. Try to run your city, then let's think of your province and your country. That's somehow, that's the perception that we have. And as we know, the first act of, I might be wrong, there have been earlier acts at pan-India level, but I think the first pan-India act for the British East India Company was in 1850. If I'm not mistaken, it was the 1st January of 1850. And the act was called as Act of 26 of 1850. And that's the first act, of pan-India, of the then British India, which was really enacted. And you do wonder, that when we are talking about Doctrine of Flags of 1848, probably this was a stick given to us that, okay, you can start running your cities. And most of the princely states which were taken up by the then British East India Company in 1848 will be the first areas where you find the municipal bodies happening. As far as the case of Maharashtra is concerned, I think the then northern Kannada district, which was a part of the Peshwa's domain, and then the Bombay province, was the first one to come up with the municipalities in 1850. And so was the case with then the one princely state was taken over, and then you started having municipalities there. The same was the case for the Nagpurs of Bhosle when it was taken over by the British East India Company in 1854. You started having municipalities in 1855, 1866, 1860 onwards. So this peculiar mix of the municipal governing and the general freedom struggle then you saw in 1885 onwards, I think brought in a different flavor of nationalism and maybe romanticism of decentralized democracy and learning democracy as and that's of course required. No one will be saying anything about it, because with all its ills and negativities and everything, democracy is the best thing that you can have. That's very clear. That's everyone will, I hope, agree with that. So but in Indian context, this strange cocktail of democratic decentralization, romanticism, local self-government has got mixed up with the municipal issues and the currently managing Indian cities in 21st century. I somehow find it is not direct carry over that you can use these ideas and concepts into managing cities of 21st century. And the dynamics of I always feel that we don't have a discipline of cities. There is no subject of cities, and there is no cityology or cities is whatever. So we depend upon different social sciences and engineering studies to depend upon them to really how they look at Indian cities. And so that is, I think, a major gap. And any study of cities also in India gives an intermix of cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary favors, which are not taken over by any particular subject or a discipline. When it's try to explain it from its own perspective. So, with this backdrop, when we talk of democracy and Indian cities, I think I always felt that customer probably is more powerful than a citizen or a voter. I won't use the word citizen, but a voter. Whichever urban local bodies I had opportunity to work with, maybe 20 to 30% of the population of cities ever votes. And one who gets 10% of the votes to the population runs the municipality. There has been so much of experimentation with democracy in cities all over the Indian states. It is probably most experimented form of elections and form of wars. You have got panel system, you have got 3-4 member panel system. Sometimes you have got a single ward member, and there's a lot of permutation combination happenings with that. Yes, democracy will be about elections, but I feel now it is not sufficient. Democracy need not be only of voting once in 5 years. If you go at the base of democracy, it is engagement and participation. And I feel that democracy is not just political or voting. It also has to make itself feel in economic level. It also has to make itself feel in participation, in economics. And we need to expand the definition of democracy, at least for the cities, going beyond the typical, vote once in 5 years formula that we have. And I think that should, I think we should try that now. Because I also worked in as a CEO Smart City for my earlier tenure. And the board of directors are 50% of board of directors are made of councillors. It's not that councillors are not represented. They are, in fact, in some cases, the chairman is the mayor of a city. In some cases, it is they are in the part of the board of directors. And somehow the the councillors, the mayor, the deputy mayor, the opposition leader, the standing committee, and all those 50% of the board of directors of a smart city are sitting councillors. It's not that they do not have any role or any participation in a smart city. But I feel that the current urban scenario is getting so complex that no single institution is capable of handling and managing a complex Indian cities. If you think of bigger metropolitan areas like say Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata and even Bangalore and Hyderabad also now grown up, Ahmedabad also grown up. Now I personally feel, I wonder sometimes the ability of a municipal form of government to really cater to these huge city regions. I remember once, Soumyadip said that the Paris has a 3-tier system of city government. It has a typical, ward, then maybe what we call as municipality, third also the metropolitan region. So there is an innovation that, such global cities are showing, in which, of course, the political participation and electoral democracy for that is an important part. But my hypothesis would be it is now falling short of managing the cities of 21st century. It is too complex to handle by any particular institution. And the interdisciplinary and shall I say, the interconnectedness of a big city region is also tremendously difficult. And in fact, if you look at those of us who have stayed are staying in huge city regions like Mumbai and even Delhi, how many times you think in a political framework of connecting with your city in my way of voting or by of going to a council or something. Middle class, so-called, it's a cliche now that they don't participate in municipalities. They maybe pay a tax once in a year of public tax, but otherwise the participation in electoral politics is less. The public perception of electoral politics is what it is. I won't be going to the Vora committee and all those things, but it's very easy for a local, for institutional capture of a small institution. If you study what I recollect from reading from my college days is that the concept of institutional capture of cities is the most easiest one, and it has been documented even in the United States. I think some of the cities there, the typical Chicago School of Sociology and whatever works that came out of that, we have seen. So conceptually, it is how we comprehend the word deepening would lead us to what we compare with and what we really want that to happen. I would prefer this word continuously, that the city is in 21st century. I feel till a municipal, this concept is of 6th, 5th century concept of later Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire became weak, they made a arrangement that, okay, can collect your own taxes for annual tribute. That is the definition of municipal form of government in the encyclopedia. That's a 1500-year-old concept. I mean, how long are we going to tie that on our neck and try to manage and engage with the challenges that we are having? Yes, participation, I think, is more crucial and important than voting once in 5 years. Democracy is not about councillors or elected representatives. It is about citizens. But the feudal, the feudal imperial this complex we had in Indian society, or maybe society in global South for that matter, you tend to, it's not, we know how of course, but frankly speaking, the quality and caliber of, a councillor who is supposed to lead a city. I mean, yes, progressively we are seeing, but no, I am yet to see anyone who is as erudite as Panwarji, who has led a city. I'm not praising him because we are in the same panel, but I haven't really seen. I have seen very, very few councillors, who are capable of comprehending the challenges of 21st century. What do you talk of smart city? Okay, it will be negative. Someone will talk about what is climate challenges, climate emergency. The ability to comprehend that is going down. So I somehow, having worked in municipal bodies, having worked in smart city, now in a different role, I sometimes feel, we need to demunicipalize Indian cities. We need to demunicipalize Indian cities because as an institution, it is cracking up, it is showing its limitations, and putting any and everything onto municipal bodies is probably, we are overstretching the romanticism of electoral democracy into management of a city. I think we are confusing with these two topics. What is government? As I said, it is the laws you make and the tax you collect for me. So that, of course, has to be there. There has to be representative democracy. There has to be direct party. I feel Indian cities can, we can deepen democracy in this connotation which I'm taking of having direct participation. Why do you want to? It's a small city, maybe so we have a B-class council or C-class council, or I won't be talking of very big, huge city regions. They are too big. It can't run. But a small city of say 1 lakh population, why can't we have a referendum system on important topics? I mean, it may be electoral, it may not be electoral. We will have to try new ideas and new issues, because the systems are cracking up. We may take a stand, and the blame game is always there, it is X and Y and Z, but now we are seeing how things are cracking up. And then it is, we cannot do a small, patchwork of things, and we'll have to go down deep and understand that, sometimes I always go back. I'm sorry, I'm slipping back to my college books which I have read, but I always found that Durkheim's study, of moral density, of the number of frequency increasing as the society increases, is now extremely significant in bigger city regions in India, because the interaction and they are so huge, the number has increased in magnitude. It is, if it was a 10 raised to 2, it is now 10 raised to 10. And how are we going to connect these innumerable social relations that are evolving in a huge city region? And therefore, I think that for me, the deepening of democracy in a way is giving primacy to the citizen. He may be a voter once in 5 years. He may be a taxpayer once in a year. He may be complainant a couple of times in a year. But democracy has to be about citizens' participation. And representative democracy, yes, it is a basic structure of our constitution, so no issue on that. But in cities, I think we should try participative democracy in a sense. We should go to referendum system. If you want to, how to make a part of that is there. We had some experiments on participative budgeting. What's harm in if you open up to everybody. Let everybody make their opinion known. They want a road to build or not to road to build. Because I have seen institutional captures very closely. And it is, of course, it's a public forum. I shouldn't to be, whenever one writes a memoirs, they could be part of that after retirement. But otherwise, the Indian cities has to be about the citizen first. There I always find that element of technology is in them. I always find technology is a great enabler. It's a great facilitator. It has its limitations, yes, but that is the best choice that we have, because if you in practical terms, when best is not available, available is best. That is what the Indian jugaad is. That is what the innovation and enterprise is about. There has to be entrepreneurship in cities now. I'm not talking of the typical capitalist and public private and that. I think these are too. I think these words are now become too dry and drab now. They have lost their relevance, very honestly. So we cannot depend again and again on old ideas. There has to be innovation. The deepening of democracy will be through innovation, I believe. And the focus has to be the citizens, not the karma kanda ritual of democracy, which is electioneering. Because I think electioneering has hijacked democracy. And it has gained significance much more than it is like the means becoming, this is typical standard means and displacement. The means themselves becomes the ends, and that is there. And I think therefore, looking at cities only from a political scientist perspective, I think will only give us a partial comprehension, therefore a partial solution to the problem. There has to be greater interdisciplinary, interaction, engagements, collaborations. Then when there has to be inter-collaboration. Let it be multilateral. Let it be mafia. Let it be bureaucracy. Let it be political parties. Let it be Gundaism, whatever. But you cannot now run an Indian city just by harping about the romantic old ideas. There has to be now our generation, or we will have to invent new ways of running a city. And whatever we have in our mind, we will have to learn what other cities are doing, what we have to learn, what other countries have been doing, greater international collaboration. And that's way I look at this issue. Sorry, I think it was a rather longish monologue, but these probably thoughts were in my mind for a lot of years. Whenever I used to probably sit in the as a commissioner in the council, the general body meeting, and I've seen how the things can go. So I think the citizen has to be. I will it's rather long issues. I will try to conclude now. I think the deepening of democracy in cities can happen only by making citizen the soul, not the sole focus of the entire innovative and entrepreneurship that we might, which is required for cities. The challenges that we are facing, what we face now, with what we are facing now, cities across India and maybe across globe, in fact, tell us that now it is our responsibility to innovate. We cannot depend upon a idea of a millennia, older than a millennia, to look of what we would be doing this. We require greater participation and collaboration. So sorry, it was a rather longish, probably longish. It was more of an extempore monologue, which probably I couldn't stop myself. Or probably these thoughts were in my mind for a long time. So my personal reflections, obviously. So thanks a lot for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Unhale. And your personal reflections, I think, indeed provide some interesting dimensions to this entire discussion of today. And so let me now move over to our last discussion today, Dr. Simi Mehta. Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to everyone. And thank you very much, Professor Sarin, for such an informative presentation. I will echo what Mr. Samir Unhale has spoken so passionately, but more as a student of political science. So there are a couple of points that I would like to make about the whole notion of democracy, which was supposed to ensure the centrality of the people. However, while it exists in principle in the whole government scheme of things, for the people, it is a lot of it is a top-down approach. So when you talk about collective wisdom, there is a fine line that needs to be drawn with what Alexis de Tocqueville had said about the tyranny of the majority. To what extent is research accommodative of collective wisdom, or perhaps it even seeks to impose the vantage point from where the researcher's hypothesis originates, then becomes very crucial. Next, I would like to talk about the local representatives that you spoke about. Fundamentally, they are supposed to be available for in the service of the people 24/7. In fact, it is based on this promise that I'll be there whenever you call me for any difficulties or whatsoever, that people trust in them, and then they are elected to power. So, but once they are elected to power, there is a feeling that overtakes them, that they are an important person or a very important person, and then this creates a void between them and the people. So what we find is that they remain confined to their comfort zones, and again get to action when elections are there around the corner. So the question here is, can research bring about changes in the psyche of the ruler and the ruled? Then I'll talk about the capacity building, which you spoke about, which I totally agree to, and this is very important. But then there are problems with it. The not in the concept per se, but the training programs are normally organized in the inception of their terms. But again, how much can they absorb? How much can these elected representatives absorb through such trainings, the rules, regulations, norms, etc., where I can also highlight, if I may, about their own literacy levels, their interest to sit through such programs, or even whether maybe their health does not allow them to sit through such sessions, or even their willingness to participate in them. So the utility of such capacity building programs, it is diluted. And when we begin to ask questions, undertake research on the distribution of power, dynamics of limited resources, and anything that could, help to bring about a positive change, there often comes a backlash, as we are experiencing. So if I may, I would problematize this basic research hypothesis that after the representatives accede to power, whether they really ensure responsiveness, whether they really ensure transparency and even accountability to the citizens, who are the soul of a democracy, as Mr. Unhale has mentioned. So essentially, the conversation around democracy and a well-framed definition on democracy, as you'd know, all of us would know that a basic definition of democracy is also lacking. And neither it is a very rigid ideology. It adapts to the local circumstances, and it also depends a lot on the elected representatives' own charisma. What I'd like to submit to the panel is that deepening of democracy is not achieved by simply merely fulfilling the quotas of the minorities, or maybe weaker sections of the society, or even women. So where does the decision-making power really lie becomes very important. And I would like to end with a provocation to Professor Sarin and to the panelists as well, to reflect upon this as to how can research ensure that we have representatives who are fully committed to public service and not for and not for personal enrichment. How can research ensure that their election is contingent upon having a clean record? How can research ensure that their declaration of assets and declaration of assets is true to the figure that they have declared, and even on perhaps explore on how have they accrued such assets? So, would any sort of research measurement on these following questions enable the citizens to make an informed choice or informed judgment about whom they should vote for, and whom they shouldn't? So with this, I will end my discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi. And I think we have already a lot of issues which are raised by our panelists. So it's over to Professor Ankur, for your response.
Thank you. That was really an insightful discussion, and I'm very grateful for all the panelists for the response. I just sort of again come back to what and I'll try to discuss these issues that have been raised from the vantage of what I have been trying to do. Essentially, I'm asking this question: what role what role do researchers play in this process? And we can talk about the nature of democracy and all of that, but it's a critical reflection on researchers themselves. And I feel there are many elements of questions that researchers have not asked themselves. There are a lot of questions that we should be asking about institutions, we should be asking about the elected representatives, but there are not many questions that we have asked of ourselves. And do we really have we played a productive role in deepening democracy? And I would still submit that we have not. And I think there are institutional problems and there are reasons because of which we have not. And I think just, speaking, taking off in some sense from what Dr. Mehta was just raising, see, one of the issues that we've not looked at and linking to the point that Mr. Nanas was also making, that we have not looked at the diversity of the researchers themselves. What backgrounds do we come from? We have not. A large part of the research community comes from a very elite background who does not interact with councillors, corporators, elected representatives, whoever they are, on a basis in terms of, these are not folk who get us our services. We have other ways and means of doing that. Until the research community becomes a more diverse and representative community, I think many of the objectives that the discussants have sort of, very rightly raised may not be achieved. So that's really the first point that I want to make. The second is, I completely agree with the view that, electoral democracy is not, in fact, it can, if we focus too much on it, it is counterproductive, it is perverse. And what we really need to be asking this question is the question of participative democracy. Now, participative democracy can only happen or can be encouraged in smaller democratic spaces. And that is where, whilst we may try to think of better institutions and how, maybe a different form of governance that, Samirji is talking about. But right now what we have are the ward committees, the ward sabhas, the area sabhas, which should have been there, not really functioning. And those are all institutions that we have to work with right now. So again, I go back to this question: what role can research play in ensuring that these institutions function better? What councillors for all the, and I think Dr. Mehta pointed out very, appropriate questions in terms of sort of saying, well, what happens post elections? But for all those perversions, and, one is they probably exist even in a greater magnitude at, when you talk about more higher level elected representatives. These are still people who are staying in the local communities, perhaps, perhaps potentially on a relative scale, more accountable to those communities, right? So yes, they do become VIPs, but maybe not the VVIPs that, our other elected representatives become. And again, that is what the institutions are today. So then given that, well, what can and what should research be doing? Now your point about, and again, it's something that we've experienced ourselves. We say capacity building, we've organized meetings, and, we invited 198 councillors, 3 have shown up, right? Yes, that is the reality. But maybe organizing meetings, trying to get them to come into a classroom is not the right way to communicate with them, right? We have to figure out, well, how do we communicate with them? How do we bring them in a space that they also start recognizing formal systems, procedures? What Samirji was talking about. Should they not know about climate change? Should they not know about how the importance of technology? They should, right? So how do we get them there, right? And that is a challenge for us researchers. If we continue to believe that, we can do business as usual with, elected representatives, no, that's not going to work, right? So I think, I think a lot of what has been shared, I completely resonate with. going back to the issue of sort of what Dr. Chatterji was raising, Tikenderji was raising, the populist authoritarianism and democracy, right? I mean, where we increasingly find ourselves confronted with this question that does democracy imply that? And I think, no, it need not imply that as long as there is decentralization and devolution. I mean, democracy does not naturally gravitate towards populist authoritarianism, depending on the institutional structures that there are there, the sufficiency, the presence of checks and balances, the adequacy of decentralization and devolution. So again, it's been a fascinating conversation and discussion for me. But I, again, want to just loop back to this question that we as researchers are not critically asking questions of our own selves. We are asking maybe questions of others, but we are not trying to figure out where exactly we might be going wrong and what exactly we should be doing differently. So that's really, where I again want to sort of conclude. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. And now I think we have Dr. Arjun Kumar, who is the director of IMPRI. So is Arjun, is he here, Arjun?
Sir, I am, yes.
Okay. So
yes, no, I did not wanted to ask questions very late.
Please.
Still, but I really wanted to, ask two questions to sir, which was coming to my mind when we decided the topic only, that can research play a role, we are saying, but what kind of research play a role? Sir, have you also looked into this question? That because research is also action, and city government or city as a union of people also deal with many people, largely also with advocacy people, research and advocacy. And one other question, what answer, since you are from IIM, and time and again we are making new specialized body. For example, there is a Greater Hyderabad Metropolitan Region, or there is DDA, and now we have the SPVs for all the smart cities. Come any project, we will make a SPV. So again, how do you see the institutional fragmentation which is there, looking into this governance question? And because the suggestion from research from the point of execution, as Samir sir was saying, that comes to be, a specialized institution. And then there is G2G constraint also in India. So from the knowledge part also, so city governments are also relying on state governments, I would say, only to government institution for research. How do you see, or let us say global consultants in case of smart cities, which is also not working. Also, since we are also moving to the information age, smart cities has this component of people's participation through a questionnaire, that what do you feel about? How do you see these components or these participatory methods also deepening the democracy in the city, or how do you see these new developments? Ankur sir. Soumyadip sir, would you like to add anything? You have been patient.
No, it's fine. So you please, it's already been long session, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. First, maybe what kind of research? I was just trying to show some examples of the kind we have been engaging with, which provides both information to the corporators or councillors and citizens, in terms of when, citizens can see where are the councillors spending their money. And that sort of hopefully then deepens some of these, a healthier democratic engagement. The question of the rise of parastatals, and that's a larger question. Dr. Tikenderji in some ways has sort of addressed that. I think it again reflects sort of a very technocratic viewpoint, and I'm not saying a technocratic viewpoint is not essential. I think some part of it needs to be there, but it also has to in some ways be married with this question of democratic accountability and responsiveness. And so how do we do that? And Samirji, when he was talking about the interdisciplinarity that has to come in the research, I think it's exactly also speaking to that. Now, as far as the tools, the surveys, etc., I'm a little skeptical by and large, because I think we've adopted these tools without in letter, but not in spirit. So oftentimes these tools are used to post hoc legitimize things rather than really act as instruments of enhancing responsiveness, democratic preferences, people's preferences, and all of that. So the tools are there. We've perhaps not been using them very well. And this is a long-term process. We cannot imagine that we can somehow adopt a tool and bring in a change overnight. So we have to also be patient with some of these processes.
Soumyadip, sir.
Okay, thank you. And then I think before wrapping it up, let us again move over to our panelists just for the quick 1 or 2 minutes thought. It's over to Professor Chatterji.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, this has been a really fascinating discussion. I think one key area which needs more research focus, it's about the differentiation between what constitutes decentralization versus what constitutes devolution. I think, there is a very fine line between the two. And because, presently, we are often talking about empowerment of the cities. And this has become a topic even for the mainstream media. Every other day we talk about, there is an article about empowerment of the cities, or having a presidential type of a mayor. But the question is, this has become a buzzword sort of, that we need to have like a single point authority as a mayor. But the question is, to do such kind of a consolidation of power in the person of a presidential mayor for a city, a big city like any of the metropolitan cities in India, would that really improve the question of people's participation, or it again lead to more kind of a centralization? And how would that kind of an institution would have an interface with upper tiers of government, like the state governments or central government? Now, Mr. Unhale was talking about the issues of metropolitan regions. Many of the metropolitan regions in India, Mumbai in particular, Delhi, definitely, but others like Calcutta, Hyderabad, Bangalore, etc. Now, many of these metropolitan regions are actually bigger than many countries, many smaller European countries. And the type of budget they have, the type of human resources they have, compared to that, what we have in Indian situation, they are being treated just like a small time urban local body. So in that sense, I think there is a time has come to relook at 74th Amendment. Soumyadip, you have also raised this question about capacity gap between bigger tier cities and smaller cities. So is it possible to treat all cities above 1 million population through the same bracket? I think we need to have more granular understanding about the city scales and sizes. In that sense, here I think the 15th Finance Commission has recommended different kind of funding for million plus cities and other cities below million plus cities. I think that's a interesting step, but I think that also requires more deeper understanding, because cities above 5 million population, the metropolitan region above 5 million populations, these are really the magnets of the economy in India. But do they really have the power? And what kind of devolution is possible at what scale? I think that is a crucial area we need to discuss upon. About. And second point, we need to discuss about the roles of the different types of institutions, as Mr. Panwar was talking about, Mr. Unhale was also talking about, and Professor Sarin was also mentioning that we are now having more and more the SPVs, the smart city SPVs and other types of SPVs like for development of the railway land, development of the airport land. So how does these SPVs sit in an overall governance architecture? Obviously, I mean, there are in the smart cities, there are SPVs, there are opportunities for municipalities to participate. But how does this participation actually translate on the ground? I mean, sitting here in Bhubaneswar, what we see is that very limited participation by the municipal ward councillors in the smart city scheme of the things. So there may be the idea of participation is there, but does it really translate on the ground? And the third point is that we have the provision for ward sabhas and area sabhas also, because in many of the big cities, the size of the wards are too big. I mean, that is like, I mean, over 20,000, 30,000 population. So we need to have more smaller scale area sabhas. But there again, there are different instruments of participation, like street vending committees. There are areas for demarcation of vending and non-vending zones. So we have all these different forms of participation, but they are not realized on the ground. So that brings us again back to the question of, I mean, how much, I mean, there is a ground level mobilization. How much is the social mobilization in the city, which can push for these kind of changes? Presently, we are having the changes driven from the top. We are not having the demand for the changes from the ground up. I mean, that's a question we need to ponder about. Let's stop it here.
Thank you, Professor Chatterji, for your comments and all this. And then just let me go by request Mr. Tikender Panwar, if you please make your quick points.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
I've taken off the earphone, so I was a little.
Yes.
Just 3 quick points, I think, though. The first thing is, I think, when we speak about research and can it play a role in deepening the cities, I think what is also important is that since the 3 decades, when we had the first urban commission, the basic premise was that, cities are manufacturing hubs, which they are no more. So what is this linkage between, the 3 decades that have passed by? Now it's more of a service-driven economy. So, and what is the linkage between participatory governance in this period? I mean, in the sense that, the base and the superstructure. I mean, what has happened? Because and the huge informality that has increased in the cities. I mean, how is it also linked to reclaiming the spaces? And since the political and the economic angle that I come from, I think to me, when I see research, to me it is how, the research, how do the people reclaim their spaces in governance, in the sense in democratizing that surplus? For governance for what? Not just, where the lamppost should be, but, democratization, this entire surplus. So can research amplify my positioning? And what are the tools in that process where people have been able to get, where they've been able to reclaim? Take, for example, I do not have, that's the problem, that I have not come across such research. Maybe I'm absent that, I'm not aware of it. But take, for example, Barcelona. When they built this whole argument of let's win Barcelona. And now they are, they brought in a whole new paradigm of urban mobility, which speaks about pedestrianization, etc., which also speaks about smart cities, all inbuilt, all in-house, all that in capacity. You don't allow the Internet of Things to go out. So it all was, of course, they have a capacity. Similarly, we find a paradigm shift in Montreal, where they said, it's not let's win Montreal, but some other slogan. But those places. So how are we just understanding? And Bangalore, I think something is happening very recently where new groups have come up where they're reclaiming their spaces as far as urban governance is concerned. So I think that's the second part is about the inequity and the inequality, and then how how is it manifesting? And of course, it is linked to of course the huge, humongous amount of informality that exists in the cities. But I mean, how are we witnessing this change and this? So I mean, and the third is about the SPV's participation. Actually, we really have to research on it. We really, from the governance perspective. I don't know. I mean, I just listened that we have a few councillors and all, but it's sheer tokenism, by the way. Not a single mayor is the chairperson of the SPV. So, I mean, or have these SPVs really been able to speed up some of the work? And there are, of course, many anecdotal experiences. What kind of works have actually been undertaken? Because I remember going to Patna 2 years ago, and in fact, the Patna disaster mitigation plan, I have drafted that plan, and I asked the disaster management authority there. I said, sir, would anyone actually? So, I mean, according to me, it's one of the finest plans that we've drawn. Bringing in all stakeholders and all together. And so the head of the state disaster management authority, I said, will anyone own it? He said, forget about ownership. I mean, you just prepare the plan, we'll discuss it. And exactly 7 months down the line, Patna was flooded completely. And thanks to our SPVs and all, they blocked all our channels, constructed those. So when we say governance, did we ever bother to go down and ask what should be done? So I think there are three aspects. I think, but yeah, of course, it is important that we.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Panwar, for your comments. And then just let me move over to Mr. Unhale for your comments.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Quick comments, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think firstly, government missions and programs can very easily mainstream research about cities in the making a clarity that X amount of the budgetary allocation can be used for research projects. I think that would be a very easy way for Niti Aayog to come out that all missions, all programs which are run, X percentage of the budgetary allocation and mission funds will be used for research projects. I think that should be is just a matter of OM to be issued, and I think that can very easily mainstream research into the urban number one. Secondly, I think internship programs are happening now. In fact, even the National Smart City Mission also has an internship program in which young boys and girls, bright young boys, girls from which are much more maybe studying maybe engineering and management and even PhDs are in that way getting connected and associated. Fellows are getting associated. In Maharashtra, we had a CM fellow program, and even the Smart City Mission has an internship program, a 1-year internship, I think there, and that has become quite popular. And we are getting this young boys and girls associated with the way of functioning of Indian cities, and probably this will give an impetus to research by these two ways. I think one is making X% of the budgetary allocation mandatory for research projects, and two, by this varying internship program, by that we very easy way of getting research into, and which is extremely necessary, because otherwise you just have to depend upon hunches and sixth senses the way you are going to plodding through your policy framework. That's not so. I think these two, it can very easily happen. Third, secondly, I always felt, it's my view, I know it is one of the many views. So we will have to depend on multiple agencies to cater to the challenges that we are facing. One institutions will not be sufficient. When you have multiple agencies, you could have the limitations of one could be the strength of other, and then you could have an aggregated average, which might lead to better outcomes. Therefore, you require for greater coordination and cooperation. What are the ways of cooperation? One, of course, politics is zero-sum game, and business is also zero-sum game. So trying to find out collective wisdom or rational into this zero-sum games to a larger goal that we look for is going to be difficult. And I think we are in a cusp of history. I think this is a cusp moment, this third decade. And it could be, it could make or break the. I think we are being too pompous. We're too self-centered and maybe ego-centered. That, but I do sometimes this is a very crucial decade. That this is the decade we'll have to work on, and therefore we require greater cooperation and collaboration. There would be prejudices, there would be ideological differences, there would be political preferences, choice of leaders, ABC, XYZ, everything is going to be there. But that's what factor which is coming, because we are now 8 billion now. We are 800 crores of people, everyone is having its own set of opinions, and therefore we will be requiring this collaboration and cooperations in much greater framework than we can. And third, the hypothesis which I said, let us demunicipalize Indian cities for greater democracy. So that's the last line I had. So thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Unhale. And Dr. Singh, would you like to add something?
Yes.
Yes,
final
please.
2 quick points.
Yes.
To ensure the decentralization of power and to ensure that this actually reaches the soul, the people, the role of media, civil society organizations, influencers, as they are called in these days, private sector, it becomes really very important. And perhaps one of the factors that is unfortunately coming in between the objective and neutral research is a highly biased media, which makes ethical research very, very problematic. And can we do something about it? And if we can, it is a crucial question as we chart the way forward. So with this I will end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi. And just it's over to Professor Ankur for your final thoughts.
No, I have nothing more to add. I think we hopefully this has been interesting, and at least for me personally, I've enjoyed this conversation. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. And just to wrap it up, I think like when it comes to planning or managing our cities in India, so we need to really think about these 2 questions, like, do we keep going on the same path, pushing the same ideas, or should we try to identify and acknowledge the inherent flaws in our existing approach? And from today's discussion, it's clear that the answer to these questions are not straightforward. So we need to keep on searching answer to these questions. And I hope in our future City Conversation series as well, we will be trying to find out the answer to these those tricky questions. And I hope your cooperation, and also I hope that all of you will be joining in our future City Conversation series as well. So once again, on behalf of the team IMPRI, I thank you all, Professor Ankur Sarin, Tikender Singh Panwar, Professor Tathagata Chatterji, Mr. Samin Unhale, and Dr. Simi Mehta for joining today's conversation, and hope to see you in future events as well. So thank you once again.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Good night.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very nice presentation, Ankur.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.